Welcome to Feminist Utopia, a community dedicated to envisioning and creating a more just society for all. Welcome to Feminist Utopia.
This week in our Feminist Utopia, we live in a world where men know that being sexual harassing predators is wrong.
Whew. Yeah.
And everybody else around them recognizes that it's wrong.
Not only do they recognize that it's wrong, they're also held accountable rather than given actual more power despite what they have done, which is what's happening in our society today. And I'm thinking of Brett Kavanaugh.
Oh, he's been in the news. I know everybody's talking about impeachment, but this is along the same lines. Let's talk about the impeachment of Brett Kavanaugh.
Yeah, people were talking about impeaching Brett Kavanaugh from the moment that he got confirmed. Recently, Kamala Harris wrote an opinion piece in Elle magazine calling for Brett Kavanaugh's impeachment. And then Ayanna Pressley put forth an impeachment resolution in the House for Brett Kavanaugh. And some of this stems from, it really wasn't that long ago.
Seems forever.
Yeah. The New York Times published an opinion piece. It was an adaptation from a book called The Education of Brett Kavanaugh, an Investigation by Robin Perogabin. Sorry, Robin, I pronounced your name wrong. And Kate Kelly. And in this book review, an opinion piece, new information about allegations of sexual misconduct against Brett Kavanaugh came out. The allegations of assault aren't new, but some of the stories told could be more fully corroborated. There's one story about Deborah Ramirez. She was at a dorm party, and she said that Brett Kavanaugh thrust his penis in her face, and she swatted it away and inadvertently touched it. And what's new is that at least 7 people, including Ms. Ramirez's mother, heard about the incident when it happened. And 2 of them were classmates who learned of it just days after the party, and suggesting that it was discussed among students at the time. And during his Senate testimony, Kavanaugh said that if it had happened, it would have been the talk of the campus.
It was.
Yeah, now we're saying it was. And here's what really bothers me is that Ms. Ramirez was never asked to testify. Her legal team gave the FBI a list of at least 25 individuals who may have had corroborating evidence, and the FBI didn't interview any of them. And some of the witnesses tried to reach the FBI on their own, but were unable to.
You mean that investigation that they were all so proud of wasn't really an investigation? I am so shocked.
They did nothing.
Hear the surprise in my voice. And Brett Kavanaugh lied under oath? Again, I'm shocked. Just shocked, I tell you.
But this is our Supreme Court.
Yes.
And I feel like I have zero faith in our justice system. And Kamala Harris shares my concerns. And she commented that he was put on the court through a sham process, and his place on the court is an insult to the pursuit of truth and justice. And I agree 100%. But that's where the impeachment part comes in. If we want to restore faith in our justice system, we need meaningful accountability and transparency. And we didn't get it in the confirmation of Kavanaugh, and we have the opportunity now to do something about it.
And yet, Democratic leadership has blocked it. So I want to make it very clear that the opposition to holding Brett Kavanaugh responsible is not simply a Republican-Democrat divide or a man-woman divide. Nancy Pelosi is not interested in starting the impeachment proceedings against Kavanaugh. Ruth Bader Ginsburg just did an interview, and she discussed how Brett Kavanaugh seemed like a really nice guy. He broke barriers for women by having the first all-female law clerk team and all these things.
My question is, what was he doing with that all-female law clerk team?
I wouldn't want my non-existent daughter in the room with them.
No, he could have very well recognized that he had a problem with women and was trying to be this faux feminist and cover up his bad behavior by trying to present himself as this great feminist that's advancing the cause of women, when in reality, he's undermining them.
Yes, because if he was a real feminist, he would have acknowledged what he did and said, that was really wrong. I didn't have the moral compass at the time to know. I don't believe women should be treated that way. Yes, I did stick my penis in her face at a party because I thought it was funny and my buddies laughed, and it was wrong. And that got back to me about what was being said on the campus at Yale, and I knew I had to do better. And I have striven towards that goal every day since. There was an opportunity there if his attitudes had really changed. He didn't do that.
Yeah, and it's obvious he didn't do that. He blamed everything on beer.
I was about to say, how do you get that blotto on beer? But I'm a vodka girl, so I just don't get it. Or a gin girl. You made me into a gin girl, too. I blame you. But then you've got feminist icons like Ruth Bader Ginsburg going, that was so long ago. He's a better guy now. We need to ignore it. And I get why she does that. For starters, she comes from a time where that kind of behavior was expected.
And she experienced it.
Yes.
I'm confident, and probably other worse things.
Yes, exactly. Then there's the issue of creating a precedent by which Supreme Court justices can be impeached for not being honest enough or for any reason. And that could be perceived by other Supreme Court justices like Ruth Bader Ginsburg as a threat to the sanctity of the court.
But I think that's a slippery slope argument that doesn't really hold up in my opinion, because Brett Kavanaugh lied in his confirmation hearing.
He lied.
You can say that should be a disqualification in and of itself. If you want to absolve him of his guilt for what he did when he was in his teens, that's one thing. But the fact is, he did lie.
And got indignant about people pointing this stuff out by saying, you're lying. These other women are lying. I'm going to yell and scream and defend myself. And he trashed the women he had already harmed in this process.
So to me, that's an argument for impeachment. The thing that came up in my mind was the whole blackface issue. If I understood correctly, the Supreme Court doesn't want people to be held accountable for what they did when they were younger. Something like the blackface incident shouldn't take someone off the Supreme Court, for example. Because if you're going back 30 years, 50 years, everybody's got something, right?
Again, I think he could have gotten past it if he had issued an appropriate acknowledgement and apology. We have seen that multiple times within Me Too. When someone does a heartfelt apology, meaningful apology, it goes away and their career goes on. Hell, we've seen people do half-assed apologies and it all goes away.
Right.
When you have someone who is being excused for their behavior as a teen, he shouldn't be excused for his behavior at that table in front of the Senate during the confirmation hearings.
Agreed. And that's why I'm saying I think the other justices are safe.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to be all of a sudden, let's impeach all the justices because they did something ridiculous when they were younger. I think that it all comes down to how shoddily his confirmation process was. He wasn't properly investigated. He lied. He showed behavior unbecoming of a Supreme Court justice. He needs to go. Do I think it'll actually happen? I don't think it'll get to a vote.
I don't think so either, especially with the stuff opening up against Trump.
It's frustrating to me.
We've got Kavanaugh who lied, who has a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court. And then we've got our president trying to bully the Ukrainians by holding an arms deal over their head to go after his political opponent.
Arguably, I'd rather have Kavanaugh impeached than Trump.
Can't believe we're having this depressing conversation.
Yeah, it is depressing.
Speaking of depressing, it's not just Republicans who behave badly. As Benita and I have mentioned many times, that we met at Humanist of Houston, a non-faith-based organization. Initially, you would think that, we're going to be free of all that stuff. And yet, men behaving badly continues through the atheist movement with even more aggressive apologists trying to cover for them.
Right. I'm thinking of Lawrence Krauss, who is a fairly prominent scientist in the atheist community, who also happened to have ties with Jeffrey Epstein. We talked about Jeffrey Epstein in a previous episode, and we talked about how one thing that he liked to do to lend credibility to himself is donate money. And he donated to a lot of scientists, and Lawrence Krauss worked at Arizona State University, and Jeffrey Epstein donated about $250,000 to a program that was run by Lawrence Krauss at the Arizona State University. And Lawrence Krauss was, surprise, accused of sexual impropriety. In February of 2018, BuzzFeed published a story that contained allegations from multiple women of inappropriate comments and behavior. After the story, ASU put Krauss on paid administrative leave and began an investigation. Of course, during this whole time, he is protesting and exclaiming his innocence, but he did announce that he was retiring.
Good.
So he did retire in October. He's still denying the allegations.
And yet all these atheists are flocking to his defense saying it should go to court. It should be litigated. He shouldn't be tried in the court of public opinion. I read the BuzzFeed article. I've read allegations from other women that didn't even make it into the BuzzFeed article. And these weren't criminal levels of behavior necessarily. It was trying to leverage his status.
His position of authority over his students and others in the program.
Right. Or just people in the atheist community, too, to use his celebrity status. That's creepy. I'm not saying that people can't approach others if they're interested, but to basically dangle, well, I'm a famous guy, you should be flattered I said that to you, is bullshit. And I have never seen so many low-end people defend someone so vociferously as I have people go to the mat for Lawrence Krauss on this. They should be flattered he liked them. The hell they have to be flattered that some creepy old guy likes them.
Exactly. But you're right. He does have some actually pretty famous and powerful friends.
Yeah, that too.
He's got a podcast now. I looked it up. He's had some big name guests, including Penn Jillette, Ricky Gervais, Noam Chomsky, Brian May.
Well, Noam Chomsky will talk to anyone. Noam Chomsky also, in spite of his liberal cred, is probably okay with what happened.
Well, you have to assume that all of his guests were okay with what happened just by continuing to associate with him and support him.
Yeah, that's true. And Penn Jillette has been involved in the atheist movement. You know, he performed, I want to say, at Skepticon the last time they held it. I can't remember which one. It was the one that went bust.
Yeah, he had a bad experience and he won't be performing at any other con put on by the atheist community.
But Penn Jillette is well tied in. It isn't like he could have avoided hearing about what the allegations were regarding Lawrence Krauss. Penn Jillette had to have known.
Yeah.
And it's not just Lawrence Krauss. I mean, people have talked about Michael Shermer, and most recently David Silverman from American Atheist is back in the news.
Can I just say Michael Shermer started my path to atheism with his book, Why People Believe Weird Things.
Oh.
I picked it up on the super sale table at Barnes & Noble for like $3, and I read it, and honestly, it changed my life. And I was personally offended when I heard that Michael Shermer was such an asshole. He allegedly drugged and assaulted women at conferences and such. And I don't think that he has suffered enough negative consequences for his behavior, but he lost me and I was a fan. So that's just my, even Michael Shermer. I thought he was a good guy, but he's not a good guy. And Silverman is arguably worse.
Arguably worse. And in the nature of full disclosure, Benita and I were involved with Humanists of Houston when David Silverman came to speak And it was a different experience than having other people come and speak.
True.
From the financial arrangements to how the event went, it ended up costing Humanists of Houston not just dollars, but the ability to run events at that facility continuing through now, as far as I know.
Mm-hmm.
David Silverman's well known. He's the former president of American Atheists. He was very brash. He was always on Fox. He would go anywhere and talk to anybody and debate God, all these things. And I enjoyed him. I don't know if his particular way of doing things would attract new atheists into the movement, but it was really nice to see someone out there speaking about things like Christian privilege. And he made American Atheists, which has always been, Madeline Murray O'Hair, its founder. They've always been a bunch of loudmouth, in-your-face type of atheist activists.
Controversial.
Yes. So he fit in right into that mold. But like with Madeline Murray O'Hair, there was a bit of a cult of personality around it and around him. It all came falling apart when, was it BuzzFeed again?
I think it was.
Did another expose. David Silverman had been suspended from American Atheists, and they were very cagey about it, and it was about financial improprieties. And I will say that some things happened that I thought were a little sketchy when he came to Houston in terms of wanting cash instead of the more traditional check made to his organization. And that's all I'm going to say about that.
Well, the other thing was he was on a book tour, and he was pushing his book, Fighting God.
And American Atheist was picking up the tab. And we were too.
I mean, we pre-bought the books to sell at the event, which was a problem.
With cash.
Yeah.
I'm still salty about that one. So anyway.
Financial improprieties.
Yes, nothing illegal. I don't know what the other ones were. And there's nothing illegal about what David Silverman did with Humanists of Houston. Absolutely not. But as someone who's been involved with nonprofits for a while, when you start doing these things, you can create the appearance of impropriety or the ability for improprieties to happen. And it's up to those of us involved to not do those things. So to have the president of a major organization wanting to do these things, I personally wouldn't let him run my lemonade stand because of that, because you have to be so much above board when you're doing these things. So when all these things started coming out, then it came out that there were sexual improprieties as well. There are questions about consent. There was a woman who said that she didn't consent to the sex that they had. David Silverman was married at the time, allegedly in an open relationship. I don't know. What adults do. But when you're in a position of power, you don't start having sex with people that are looking for jobs at your organization and call it consensual sex.
Right.
And so David Silverman was furious when American Atheists finally did fire him. He went off to try and start a organization called Transitional Humanism. He said, how can anybody say I'm not a feminist? I've been a feminist for 40 years. I love women. And I swear, anytime a man says, I'm a feminist, I start looking for other women to find out, oh, did he try to do something to you? Because I've yet to find a man who brags about it so loudly who hasn't shit all over women at some point.
Right. Sometimes literally.
Yeah, literally. So David Silverman has now filed suit, a SLAPP suit, trying to squash some of this stuff, a nuisance suit. He's doing it pro bono, even though he did a whole GoFundMe to collect money from his atheist flying monkeys who want to believe unconditionally in his innocence. The idea is to shut up the women that have stepped forward.
Right.
His big complaint isn't that he lost money. It's that he is no longer able to find a job that puts him in a position of authority. Who the hell died and told you you got to be king of the atheists for life?
The ego of some of these men is just astounding to me.
Yes, and I just know what he did with Humanists of Houston. I don't know anything else. That alone, if I were a board member hiring him, I wouldn't want to hire him because I couldn't know he could act in my organization's best interest. He wouldn't know how to act using best practices. But the idea that he's entitled to be a boss, I seriously want the confidence of a mediocre white man. That's what I want for Christmas.
Right. This comes back to the whole idea of men behaving badly continuing to be put in positions of authority and continuing to get more power. And we saw that with Jeffrey Epstein too. I mean,
Yep.
he had this horrible criminal sex trafficking charges that he went to jail for or whatever. And he came back stronger than ever. And when are we as a society going to wake up and say this isn't okay and they need to suffer harder consequences?
Like, nobody's saying that David Silverman should go to jail. No one.
Right. Or Michael Shermer.
Or Michael Shermer or Lawrence Krauss.
Yeah.
Or Brett Kavanaugh.
No, he doesn't deserve to be in jail, but he doesn't deserve to be on the Supreme Court either.
Yes. And this is where I, in this very moment, at this very second, more mad at the people who support these men than I actually am at the men themselves. Right now, like this David Silverman thing, the people that are being like, well, you know, those women were lucky to have him acknowledge them. No. And you trying to support someone like that in the hope that someday you'll be in that position. It's how they sell trickle-down economics. Someday you'll be a billionaire. You don't want people to take your money. No.
Or like President Trump flat out said, when you're a movie star, when you're in a position of power, you can just grab women and kiss them and they won't even do anything.
Yes.
And every supporter of someone who does that has a fantasy of doing the same thing.
And that's what it comes down to. It comes down to a fantasy of their own sexual prowess and their own dominance, or the women that support them. It's that they're going to get chosen.
Right.
And it's all depressing. So just say no to men behaving badly.
Yeah, just say no. Agreed. But our real call to action this week is to have conversations with the men in your life, and if you happen to have children, with the children in your life, about consent and why you think Brett Kavanaugh should be removed or impeached, and why society needs to change and hold men accountable. But really having that discussion about consent, especially with our young people, is important. So I'm hopeful that if we now have this concept of consent in our lexicon and in our culture, and it needs to be reinforced and nurtured, and hopefully if we do a good job at that, younger generations won't have this same trouble. There will be fewer Brett Kavanaughs.
You can't see it over the podcast, but I'm high-fiving Benita via Skype.
And if you don't know how to have that conversation, Planned Parenthood.
Yes.
If you go to plannedparenthood.org, they have a great section on sexual consent. And they even have this little way to remember what consent is by using an acronym FRIES. So if you think French fries, F is freely given, R reversible, I informed, E enthusiastic, and S specific. So we have consent fries: freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. Easy way to talk to kids, talk to your spouse.
There's a great video about tea. I'll also put it in it's a British version, talking about consent as a cup of tea. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Yeah, have a great one. We will be back, hopefully talking about women. In our next Feminist Utopia episode, my Feminist Utopia would be
about women.
Talking about what women are doing.
I'm good with that.
I'm tired of men.
I'm so tired of men. Okay. Have a good week. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today at Feminist Utopia. If you like our work, please give us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you access our podcasts so others can find us as well. You may also become a Feminist Utopia patron at patreon.com to show your appreciation. Patrons get perks. And check out our blog and other resources at our website, feministutopia.net. Things are always being added. Email us your idea of what a feminist utopia would look like, or any questions, to info@feministutopia.net. We appreciate you taking the time to listen and grow with us. Our sound engineer is Melody Kelly. Feminist Utopia is created by Debbie Williams and Benita Malone.